Welcome to our continuing YouTube video series on employment law. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal. And in this particular video, we're going to be discussing some of the signs that may well indicate your company is looking at cutting jobs and some of the suggestions that we have with respect to a scenario where you see this as potentially being swept into this layoff job cutting scenario that is potentially going to transpire at your company. So the first scenario that we're going to look at, and it can at times be quite problematic, is the internet. The internet is swirling with rumors. You might find rumors from social media, job posting sites, employment posting sites. There are a whole bevy of rumor mills that exist. Then there's also the situation with respect to your own companies, rumors as to what's happening with your company, and we'll get into some of those. But on a more direct scenario as to where you might be feeling that there are layoffs on the horizon, your job might be cut, we'll look at a couple of different scenarios. Projects that you would normally get involved with are not being assigned to yourself. Instead, they're being assigned to other people. And oftentimes you're seeing these projects being assigned to people who are not necessarily competent for that particular project or not appropriate to that project. So all of a sudden you're seeing this shift away from you taking on these projects, especially where you are not overburdened. You're finding less and less of the interesting work coming, and it's more of satisfying the job load, providing you with work, not of consequence, and that going to other individuals. Another indicator is budgets, especially non-essential budgets are being reduced or cut. When you start seeing that, that might be an indication, as well as other indications with respect to over budgetary situations, that there might be changes afoot. Expansions, new product launches are being postponed. There's been a shift, reflects a rearticulation and refinement within the back end of the company. Those can be signs that there's something afoot within the company, and this may well include cutting off some sort of operations, projects, and you have to look at that and see where you lie in that. If there's belt tightening, if there's requests to cut back on your own personal wages across the board, if there is expenses that normally would have been expended upon but now are being curtailed, restricted, or there's an increased sense of discipline on the financial side, these too can be signs that there is an imminent reduction in jobs at your particular company. Similarly, if the company is looking to sell units, sell properties, put itself on the block for a merger or an acquisition, those also might be signs. And should the merger acquisition go through, that is also a scenario where you could very easily find yourself being cut, because what they tend to do is the corporate higher-ups are looking to eliminate redundancies, and there are oftentimes a lot of redundancies when companies merge together because they don't want to have duplicative jobs, and they also are worried about their own pay packages and generating the kind of profits that they anticipated from having this combined unit operating together. And in so doing, what they oftentimes look to do is to cut these duplicative jobs out of one side or the other. And that can be very problematic for yourself. So it might not be yourself that gets cut, it might well be. Another thing, if you're being kept out of the loop on matters going on with the company, especially where you normally were kept informed, as soon as you start finding yourself excluded, not being brought into meetings that would pertain normally to yourself, especially where the projects are ongoing and all of a sudden there's been a sort of a seismic shift as to who's involved and who's not involved, and you're one of the people who's no longer involved, even though you have potentially a significant contribution you could provide to them, and somebody else is taking it on. Or another major one is where they're asking you a lot of questions. They're trying to figure out how they could replace your role within the company. And so they're trying to get as much instruction and information as is practical so that they can fulfill that role essentially without you being there. Also, you might find that the executives that you normally deal with are extremely stressed. They're on edge. They're very curt with you. They are not in the same kind of position that they would normally be disposition-wise with respect to how they engage with yourself. That can reflect, it can reflect other things as well, as all these situations can, but when you have there a lot of people having their disposition considerably shifted, that can be a very much a telltale sign. Now, if you actually are able to see what the financial situation is, and this is not a question of going improperly into the finances of the company when you're not allowed to, but let's say you work in that side and you just normally see it coming through, and all of a sudden you see that the company is bleeding cash. It's having harder time to get the financing it requires. There's increased demands coming to it, and they're having challenges meeting those financial demands. That can be another telltale sign that people are going to be let go from the company in short order. Something you have to consider. If budgets are really being scraped down to the bone and they're being decimated, and it's just we're maintaining operations until we can get through this period, that might be another telltale sign that layoffs, job cuts are almost imminent. The fact that there hasn't been any further hiring or expansion, there's a hiring freeze put in place, and there, especially where there is a need for new people that you would see, people have left and they're not being replaced by people of considerable quality, or people are being assigned to tasks after other people have been let go or left their position, and those individuals are taking on more and more responsibility. You're not being brought into taking on that responsibility. But as those individuals are being brought in more, they themselves are becoming overly stressed because their expectations are heightened and increased. And what you're seeing is a very difficult scenario for people to operate under. The stress levels there. And especially where it's other people who are picking up all this additional work, and they're picking up work that is not necessarily suited to them. It should be somebody else, and they're not hiring that somebody else, and they're not assigning it to yourself. That is problematic for yourself, something you have to seriously contemplate. And then there's a situation where the executives start leaving. Well, if the executives start leaving, the senior people start leaving, that is a very problematic situation you can look at. And if there's floated talk about restructuring the business, another problematic sign that you've got to be aware of. Then there's always a consideration that where there has been a previous round of layoffs and things have not improved, things have deteriorated. If you've got job cuts previously and the job cuts didn't work, and it hasn't changed the situation seems to be continuing to go downhill, there is definitely a scenario where you're going to see issues potentially coming by, and you need to figure out how you're going to deal with them on your own personal front. Now, if your boss comes, the HR department, Your manager is constantly trying to figure out what exactly you do, how you do it, how you deal with people. That's another suggestion that very likely you're being looked at as a candidate for being on the chopping block. And clearly, if you start getting locked out of stuff, including locked out of your files and your emails, probably at that time it's too late to do much about anything. So that's why what we're going to talk about next is, as you start seeing some of these signs, what do you start doing? Do you start just sit back and let the wheels fall off the cart? Do you try to reposition yourself within the company? Especially if it's going to be too late to do that, or if the company is going to implode upon itself and everybody's going to be gone. What are you supposed to do? Well, one of the first things that we suggest is that at least outwardly and in the way you carry yourself on in the business sphere is you don't let this reflect on how you operate in the business. Yes, you might be upset, you might be depressed, you might be despondent, but you do not want to show that to your manager, your boss, your supervisor, anybody there. You want to be that one stellar object, at least outwardly, who's coming across as, yes, there might be a bad situation going on, but I'm not going to let it take me down. I'm not going to show it, because there is always a possibility that there are other people like that, and they might initially have marked you as one of the possible candidates to be removed from their job, to be terminated or laid off. But somebody else is also there, and they're looking at multiple candidates, and maybe even candidates who are not there, and they're saying, who do we want to continue working on with? This person's completely gone off their rocker. They're not functional. Do we really want to keep them on? And you got to also look at it this way, is that, remember this, is that even though they might be looking at letting you go, they might also be looking at letting go your manager, your supervisor, so that the determination as to who they let go might not really ultimately reflect on the person just one position up on you or two positions up on you. The higher up people might take a look at this in reassessing it and say, well, we take a look around and they might suggest so-and-so, but we're actually looking to take out the manager and some of the underlings. We want to just keep whoever's positive and contributing, and we might be wanting to restructure in a different way that we initially thought. So don't close off those areas. Don't shut them down entirely. You want to stay positive, position yourself, but at the same time, you want to be taking proactive action. And when it comes to proactive action, there's some things that you should really consider. First of all, you want to engage with appropriate outside professionals and discuss what your options are, what you should be doing, and how to position yourself. Because all too often what happens is that you allow yourself to be lulled into a situation where you just allow the situation to play out as it might be. That is the wrong scenario that you should not be taking that on. Instead, you need to be proactive, you need to manage the situation, and you need to engage outside professionals early on and appropriately so that you can be in the best position possible. The fact of the matter is that as you move forward in these situations, there's a lot out there that you might not necessarily be aware of that you should be doing specific to your role, specific to your job, specific to the company you're working for. And you should be preparing yourself, because here's the thing also. Once you wait too long, you're going to see spending, if at all, too much on the professionals or more on the professionals than if you took earlier action. And I say this because you have not prepped yourself up for taking appropriate action, getting all the information you need, and you're going to, in effect, poorly position the professional representatives that you have to not have all the information and materials that you might otherwise need to move forward. So what are you going to do? Well, talk to a knowledgeable employment lawyer and find out what their suggestions are with respect to what you should be retaining, what questions you should be asking. This means both that if there is a termination interview, but even beforehand, how should you approach any conversations with HR? What questions should you ask? What aspects should you be looking into? How do you do these actions, make these asks without falling offside, either with respect to the law or with respect to the overall hypertension that you find in the entire office that suggests that you're trying to go around things, potentially backstab, set up the company for lawsuits and the like. How do you approach that in a cordial and professional manner? Because the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, you have to take appropriate action proactively to protect your interests, your family's interests, and most specifically your financial interests coming out of this company. Everybody else is taking proactive measures to protect them. You know full well that if layoffs are potentially coming down the stream, that means the executives and the HR people and the higher-ups are heavily engaged with their own set of outside professionals, and they're looking to protect their interests heavily and seriously. So if they're looking to protect their interests, why should you not be protecting your own interests? It doesn't make sense that you let them position themselves, protect themselves, and then meanwhile you're saying, well, when things happen, I'll let them happen, and I'll try to deal with them as I want to deal with them. No, you cannot be doing that. At least that's what our belief is. You need to be proactive, and you need to be proactive in the correct manner. You don't want to set them off, but at the same time, you need to be obtaining materials. You need to be obtaining information. You need to be protecting yourself. Because the fact of the matter is, oftentimes the employers don't know fully well, and the HR people, exactly what they should and should not be doing. So they might well lock you out of stuff. They might not provide you with documentation, and it really inhibits the process of you moving forward. So when it comes to essential materials, which are properly your own, you need to find a way to attain those. You need to protect your interests. You need to make sure that emails that should be properly retained are retained, especially when there's issues related to them. Whether it's related to harassment, sexual harassment, excessive demands, improper actions on the part of your employers or your supervisors or managers, that stuff needs to be retained before you get closed out of it. You need to have all your materials or copies of those materials properly obtained. And this is critical as always, properly. That means advice of legal counsel as to how best to approach this in a way that is consistent with the law, but also records the stuff and doesn't set off, whether correctly or for whatever hypertension reasons of your employer or the HR people improperly, materials relating to your contract, your pay, your benefits, all the agreements that you have in place, all what has been agreed to, all that kind of information needs to be properly accounted for, made available to yourself, and hopefully done in a manner that you don't have to go back and start court fights to get information and materials that are properly owed to yourself. Because oftentimes you might end up in a situation where materials mysteriously disappear. They don't come back. It's improper, but it has been known to happen. Also, you want to make sure that you can get access to your personal files, your personal materials, your personal objects. And whether this means taking video of all the stuff, it means doing whatever you need to do to gain access to stuff, to retain a record of it, you need to do it correctly and properly and protect yourself. Because the last thing you want to do is put yourself in a bad position, or put yourself in a position where you don't have the information to effectively discuss with your lawyer if you are terminated, and preclude your lawyer from having the information to have the best possible position to assert your legal rights and therefore protect yours and your family's financial interests coming out of the company. This really needs to be done. And that is why we stress that you need to get the stuff, but you need to get the stuff legally and properly. And hence the importance of talking to knowledgeable legal counsel with respect to the manner with which you pursue it. It's always important to know how to proceed, because you don't want to seem as coming offside, and you don't want to accelerate the process of being put offside. Even though your employer should not be using that against you, it doesn't matter that they find excuses, even if it's in their head, and maybe later they pay for it. But at the same time, you don't want to accelerate your selection as one of the people who's going to get terminated when you don't need to. But you still want to collect that information. You want to do it in a way that is legal and appropriate. And then you want to be able to go into any meetings that you have, keeping appropriate records, keeping appropriate information, following up accordingly, so that you are operating from a position of strength moving forward. And this is one of the biggest challenges that you'll find, is that most people allow themselves to be operating from a position of weakness because they don't know what they're going into. They don't understand what is going to transpire. Oftentimes the HR people, the senior management who's involved in these meetings, they're all prepped up. They've run stuff by other HR professionals. They've run stuff by the employment lawyers already, and they know what they're doing when they go into the meetings. And you're coming in having not gone through this process, or maybe having gone through it once or twice many years ago, and they're going to ram stuff through, and you're not going to take the opportunity to effectively gain more insights, more information, position yourself properly. Horrible situation you're placing yourself on when you're not prepared. You really should be prepared before you go into any of these meetings. And you should be operating from a position of strength and a position of strategically gaining more information and reposition yourself to be in a better position as you move forward. That is critical, and that is why you need to talk to knowledgeable legal counsel to find out how best to proceed with these matters. You simply cannot let these kind of situations play out without having any proactive strategic response prepared in advance. And that's what we suggest strongly you should be doing. So you feel confident going forward, but you also are constantly positioning yourself to be in the best possible position. Because it's with that kind of proactive, strategic approach that if the layoffs do come, which you are seeing telltale signs of, that you can make the most of the situation and protect yours and your family's financial interests in the event that you are in fact have your job cut, you're terminated, fired, laid off, whatever you want to call it, but you are in a position to move forward appropriately and have your interests protected. And that's what we're hoping for yourself and that's what we work with clients for, so their interests are protected. I thank you for taking the time to listen to this YouTube video and wish you all the best as you move forward and you deal with these situations and you prepare effectively and strategically. Thank you.